Well, good morning if you are in Mexico City. Good afternoon if you're in New York City. Good evening if you're in Madrid. Today is January 31st, 2025, my 250th broadcast of Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. My very special guest on this day is the artist that I think of as the North Star of opera, the one that we in the profession look to, the one that everybody who loves opera looks to. It is Plácido Domingo joining me today from Madrid in Spain. Plácido, thank you so much and welcome.
It is great pleasure to be after so long time, so that we can talk, about so many things and that happened for a long time. So looking forward, really.
It is wonderful to see you. Just so listeners know, you and I collaborate a lot at the Metropolitan Opera in the 1980s when I was the performance manager there, and you came to my office all the time, and we had many wonderful discussions about opera, and you taught me many things, and a lot of what I know from you, and I thank you for that. Mm-hmm. So I did a little research, and I found that you date your first opera performance to September 23rd, 1959, when you sang the role of Borsa in Rigoletto in Mexico City. You were 18 years old, and the cast included Cornell McNeil and Norman Traeger. You took on other roles and then sang Cassio in Verdi's Otello in Mexico City at the age of 21. That same year, you sang in Fort Worth in Texas, Edgardo opposite the Lucia di Lammermoor of Lily Pons in her last operatic performance. I saw you for the first time in 1968 when you stepped in at the Met for Franco Corelli as Maurizio in Chilea's Adriano Lecouvreur. It starred Renata Tebaldi. And ever since, you have performed with all of the greatest singers and conductors in a career that has lasted more than 65 years. So I have a question for you. Are there any singers, conductors, or directors you have not worked with whom you would like to have worked?
Well, I think that I sang with almost everyone. And I said almost because I was not able to sing with Maria Callas. But we almost was going to happen because we were having, my wife and me, we have a dinner with her in Paris. And I said, Maria said, I am going to be singing in London, Cavalleria and Pagliacci. And I said, I'm sure it will be fantastic if you can sing Santuzza. And said, and she said, right? She said, well, but if you are singing both, because you are singing Cavalleria and Pagliacci, why I cannot do Cavalleria and Pagliacci? I can do Santuzza, and I can do also the soprano of Pagliacci. But I said, well, let's try to do the Santuzza. But after it didn't happen. It don't happen, but it almost, so I'm sorry, because really I admire her very much.
Absolutely. Has opera changed in these decades?
Hello. Oh my God. It has changed so much, I mean, we have today so many performances that can be seen live by internet at the cinema. And today the seasons had different titles for the public. Before, one opera was done many times, and but now they had most of the theaters, especially Vienna, I have to say, I think for the public then go to Vienna, they can see 6 shows in 1 week, different 6 operas different. And in the change over the decades, in my opinion, is positive, but it should be used with respect, because opera has to be experienced in the theater, you know.
I'm concerned about the fact that many people view opera primarily on a screen, whether it's cinema or their computer, because to me, opera is first of all the music, the sound, and that sound can only really be experienced inside a theater.
Yeah, today an opera performance can be seen live via internet or at the cinema.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, there are so many possibilities. The day to day. I don't know what is going to happen in the next decade. You know, so but it was fantastic. You know, the first performances that we were doing, they were directly to their houses. You know, it was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many performances I was able to do in different places, and it was such a modern thing. And I don't know what will happen, what will be the future, you know.
When you worked with people such as Lily Pons or Mario Del Monaco, they were connected to an older style of doing opera. And I'm wondering, do you think people sing differently now, or are the basic required elements the same?
Well, I mean, they were great singers, and but today it is a little more difficult, or more, you know, because no little, but a lot, because the public is used to see really acting. Today, uh, I see so many new singers. You know, I mean, I always, since I start, I said how important was to act. You know, not only sing. You know, but the public is expecting now the actors on the stage. You know.
You were born in Spain, a country that's produced a lot of outstanding singers. And although I could ask you about many singers you've worked with, I'd like to only ask you about three Spanish singers who I really love very much, because I think you can give me insights about them. Um, my father was a musician, and when he trained me on opera, he gave me four voices. The soprano was Victoria de Los Angeles. The
Mm.
mezzo soprano was Marilyn Horne. The tenor was U.C. Bierling, because you were still a boy. And the bass was Ezio Pinza. He did not give me a baritone. I don't know why. But the first recital I ever heard when I was about 8 years old was Victoria de Los Angeles here in New York City. My father took me, and I met her after, and I immediately fell in love. And I never spoke to her again, but I would love to know your knowledge and your feeling about Victoria de Los Angeles.
So she was an extremely beautiful, you know, and a great actress, and a beautiful voice. Unfortunately, I never sang with her, you know. I hear her sing, but I was not able to hear her. I'm sorry, really.
Yeah. The next one, who I also fell in love with, I fall in love with singers very easily, was Teresa Berganza, the mezzo soprano, who I heard a lot in Milan at La Scala, a little bit in New York. I heard her in Spain. I saw her teach. I found her a wonderful actress and very charismatic on the stage. Did you sing with Teresa Berganza?
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah.
Especially, I have to say that we sang Carmen, and it was difficult to to than she will act, because she has more light, you know, mezzo, and Carmen, it was a difficult opera, but I really convinced her, you know, that she should do a beautiful Carmen. And we have an extraordinary production that was Piero Fagioni was the director. And then we have Katia Ricciarelli, De Michaela, Ruggero Raimondi, the Scamillo, and this was at the Opera de Paris in 1980. So this was an extraordinary, and she was so happy after, because at the first time then we talked, she said, "Well, I don't know if I can," and we convinced her. So we were very happy. It was an extremely beautiful production.
Do you think that a Spanish opera singer has an advantage playing Carmen?
Well, I mean,
or Don Jose?
I think we understand very much the character, you know, and yeah, she'll be coming all the land of Andalusia, you know, so the more in Spain, everybody it goes to, you know, Andalusia, because it's kind of a different that other cities, the different cities in not only Sevilla, Cordoba, so many places beautiful.
And finally, a singer I know you worked with, I worked with her a lot. For many people, she's the most famous soprano of all. The most favorite is Montserrat Caballé.
Well, with Montserrat, really, I mean, I cannot say how many things we did, but we work a lot together, and operas, recordings, concerts. I mean, did you remember the Rudolf Bink Gala?
Yes, 1972.
Yeah. So there was really with her. I mean, I cannot count how many performances we did together and recordings, you know.
So I think that she was a much better actress than she was given credit for, because her singing was so gorgeous that people didn't notice her acting. But for example, her Act 2 of Tosca was very elegant, and her own interpretation of the character was distinct from any other Tosca I've seen, because most Toscas are very fiery and tempestuous. This was a lady. And whenever she moved her hands, because Caballé had very expressive hands, instead of the way most Toscas see the knife and they grab the knife, she took off her earrings. I remember it so well. And she put her earrings down on the table. And at the moment the music says there's the recognition of the knife, she didn't grab it. She put the earrings down and she gently picked up the knife and held it to herself like this. And it was so specific. And whatever the role, Elizabeth in Don Carlo is another example where she really was a queen and sang beautifully. Tutte le vanità at the end was just so remarkable. So if I'm correct, you've sung more than 4,000 performances. You've conducted many performances. You've sung at least 150 roles. I'm sure I've heard you in 75 of them. I would love to know your method for how you study a role. I know you sit at the piano. How do you study the score? Do you read the orchestral line, the vocal line? How do you study when you teach yourself a role?
Well, thanks to my parents that, of course, being singers of zarzuela, I went to the theater very early in my life, you know, I mean, at 6 years old, 7 years old. And then they have their company of zarzuela. And I was sometimes, they have a beautiful, in the zarzuela maybe is the opera, if you need 80 musicians, or maybe 100 if you have Wagner and so on. In the zarzuela, you need at least 50. But, and it was sometimes they were doing the zarzuela. My parents, they were doing 2 zarzuelas in one day, And after the second performance, they rehearse the two productions for the next day. It is amazing. And it was sometime that it was not so good economically, generally in Mexico. And my parents started to do the zarzuela with reduced orchestra. Maybe they were having 12 musicians. And because I play the piano, and for instance, we will not have three horns, for instance. Mm-hmm. I was in the piano, helping to do some of the sounds that we don't have it in the orchestra. So I very early I start to be, thinking that I start singing, and I start also helping them and conducting also. So this has been extraordinary for me, thanks to them, thanks to my parents, because we have this music divine that is zarzuela.
Yeah. So for people who are listening who may not know zarzuela, it's a musical form that was born in Spain and is performed in countries that speak Spanish. And there are dramas and there are comedies and there are all kinds of forms of zarzuela. It is like opera, but it is in Spanish. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it's extraordinary works, and we have some of them. Then there are 3 acts, but we have also 2 zarzuelas, and they last like an hour and a half. So we have an extraordinary, big repertoire, and it's one of the things that I am thinking to do now in Spain, in Madrid. I like to do a school for zarzuela, because it is so much interest in the whole world. Since in my concerts, I always sang opera and I sang also zarzuela, and every day all the singers in all the world, they are singing also zarzuela. So. Mm-hmm. I want to have this school in Madrid, that we hope that maybe in 1 year we will have it.
You have sung really all the great composers in all the languages. You've sung the Italians, Verdi, Puccini, Mozart, Donizetti, Bellini, Rossini, a little Rossini, I think. You've sung in French a vast repertoire. You've sung a wonderful Hoffmann by Offenbach, many French roles, Werther. You've sung Wagner and Strauss, Bizet, left out Bizet, Massenet, Gounod in French. You've sung Tchaikovsky. One of my favorite performances of yours was in Pique Dame, Queen of Spades, here at the Met, in a wonderful production. Yeah. I was asked about 35 years ago to give a lecture in Washington in which I was asked to talk about your repertoire, your unrivaled range of repertoire and the excellence across the spectrum. And in preparing that lecture, I struggled to find a metaphor to try to explain how one man could be singing all of this different kind of music in different roles. And then I reached a concept that your repertoire is like a museum, and I called it the Plácido Domingo Gallery. And I said that each portrait is an indelible portrait, and many people would agree that one liked Otello, and one liked Don Jose, and one liked Hoffman, and one likes Mario Cavaradossi. You can name their different roles. And so in my Plácido Domingo Gallery, I have my favorites, and I want to ask you just about 3 or 4 of them. I learned Don Carlo from you and from James Levine. I had not seen it before, and there was a production in 1983 at the Met. We had Morella Freni, Louis Quilico, Grace Bumbry. It was a wonderful cast. And Don Carlo that day became my favorite opera. And we did a live transmission to Europe on television. And I remember very well that I was behind the scenes watching you from behind, and then going out to the front and watching you from the front, and looking at you live, and then looking you in the camera. Everything worked. And it was a live performance. It was not a taping. And I must say, all of you, Franey, Bumbry, Quilico, everyone, it was such an astonishing moment, because that was the moment I realized that opera can exist live in the theater, but also people all over the world watching you. How did you develop your character of Don Carlo? Because it's the opera where everybody cares about him, but there are many scenes where you're not in it and they're singing about you. As a Spaniard, do you connect to that character, Don Carlo?
Well, of course, it's some story, some history of not only the opera, but about the what happened also in Spain. You know, this opera is very special for me, because I did my debut in Vienna, the Staatsopera, is now 57 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was an extraordinary cast. Cesare Siepi, he was singing the Filippo, and the Posa Costas Pascalis. Then Elizabeth was Gwyneth Jones, also great.
Ah.
You know? And it was a conductor, Władysław Klobuchar. And it is amazing, you know. Vienna has been a very special opera house for me. I have been doing things. And the fact is that it's an anecdote. I mean, the day that I made my debut, not my debut, my audition in Vienna, if I was in my repertoire, Ballo in Maschera, that day, the day that I make the audition, I could make my debut in the opera, because it was Giuseppe Di Stefano was to sing that day in the Ballo in Maschera, but he was sick. In fact, I have seen him in the street, because Di Stefano was in Mexico, very much loved, and I was singing with him. He was doing Cavaradossi, and I was doing Spoletta, you know, in the Tosca. And he was in a Rolls Royce in Vienna, and I saw him in the street say, "Hey, bambino," because dice, "Cosa fai qui?" Oh, vengo a fare la dice, io vado, I am going to the doctor because my throat is not fine. And in fact, you know, I was able, if I had the Ballo in Maschera, I will make my debut in that day. So that's a good story, you know.
The first time I heard you in Vienna, I was a student. I was studying in Italy with Franco Zeffirelli and other people. And I had 2 weeks, and I went to Vienna because I wanted to go to Vienna. And I bought a ticket for Tosca that night. And it was you, Grace Bumbry, and Cheryl Milnes. And I think it was Zubin Mehta, but I'm not certain, conducting. And it remains one of the two greatest performances of Tosca I've ever seen. And the other one was you and Eva Bartone at the Met. But I remember so well, it was not my first Tosca, but I remember so well that I understood finally what made Tosca such a great opera. And I remember that the audience, I'd never experienced the Vienna audience before, was absolutely ecstatic. And in Italy, in New York, I'd never seen an audience like that. And I read, and you can confirm this, that the longest curtain call in the history of the Vienna State Opera was you and I think Katja Ricciarelli in Otello. It went on for more than an hour. So Vienna is obviously very special to you. The last time I actually saw you was in Vienna at the Opera Ball in 2016. You and I were both working at that time at the Opera House, and Danielle Denise and you were the featured artist, and you were singing and conducting, and I was speaking. And talk, if you would, more about Vienna, because it's a city I really love for music and many things.
Well, I mean, I have done so much there, perhaps with the Metropolitan Opera, so much. So I mean, I have been we're thinking also about Wagner, because I was doing the Sigmund in the Valkyrie, and that was in I think in '92, with
Exactly so.
Yeah, Waltraud Meyer and Hildegard Behrens was doing the Brunhilde also, and it was Christoph from Dohnali, which still conducts a lot in Vienna, And I also something extraordinary, for me in New York, to do the Queen of Spades in New York, is very special also, with such a cast, with the Dmitry Horostovsky. I think the Lisa was Gorchakova, Galina.
Yes.
And the Countess was Elizabeth Soderstrom, I mean, and Olga Borodina, and Valery Gergiev.
Yeah.
My first performances with him, and was Mojinsky, the production. I mean, so to sing in Russian, it was how long, to prepare the opera, I mean, simply, I mean, to word by word, but it was such a great satisfaction and has been one of my great love operas.
I want listeners to know that this opera, Queen of Spades, is coming back to the Met in May and June of this year. The production is by Elijah Moshinsky, who died a few years ago of COVID, unfortunately. And he and I were very good friends. And I think it's one of the greatest productions of any opera that I've ever seen. Yeah. It's a nearly perfect production. And I don't want to spoil it for people who have never seen it, but there is an absolutely magnificent scene in which you, Yerman, the not the title character, but the leading character, are trying to get the secret of the tre carti, the three cards. And the old countess, the Queen of Spades, is the person who has them. And usually they have a very old opera singer play the role. Regina Resnick played it not so old, but most opera singers are very old. And Elizabeth Soderstrom, who was a great artist, her voice by that point, there was not much voice, but the artistry was so extraordinary that scene with the beautiful lighting, which you as on stage didn't see, but the lighting was perfect, was one of the greatest moments I've ever seen in an opera house. And I thank you for that, because again, it was a role that you introduced me to. Another role that I knew, but I didn't really know it until I heard you do it, was Wagner's Lohengrin, who was another Spaniard, actually. He comes from northeastern Spain, and the thing that was so magical about that performance, and I've really come to love Lohengrin whenever I see it, is the music is gorgeous, but the way your character arrives, he's a man with a mystery. We don't, there's something about him we don't know. And if no one has seen Lohengrin, I'm not going to tell you what that is. But you brought the mystery part. Many singers I see who do it arrive and they're very strong and very dramatic. You arrive very quietly. And people had to discover who you as Lohengrin were, and then at the very end of the opera, in Ferdinand Land, you reveal your whole story. Do you have a special feeling for that character of Lohengrin? Because it's when you did it, it was gorgeous.
Well, you can imagine, first of all, I have arrived to Hamburg for a long contract, So for the contract was for it when in some days it's a company of American singers. They were in that, and I was singing with Arlene Saunders. They asked me, to do Lohengrin. I mean, for me, he said, how can I do this opera? I mean, this is the first time that I will be singing in German and to sing in Hamburg. So it was unbelievable, I mean, we have also a great King Henry Hans Sotin. And, I mean, what can I tell you? I mean, this opera is something, perhaps with all the big repertoire that I have done in my life, I think it was been in the best 3 operas or 4 that I love most,
That was 1968. So you were a very young man when you did Lohengrin.
27, yes.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Now, if I were to say to you that my favorite Plácido Domingo role of all happens to be a baritone role, because at a certain point in your career, after gorgeous tenor work, you began to very carefully select certain baritone roles, and your performance of Verdi's Simone Boccanegra is just one of the most remarkable performances I've seen of anything. I love that opera. I saw you do it with James Levine and I believe Joseph Kaleha and Liana Hartunian at the Met, and it was extraordinary. To me, your Otello is sort of the great summit of the tenor, but Simone Boccanegra is right there. In some ways, a similar character, although I think that Simone Boccanegra learns about life. Otello does not learn about life, baby. Talk about how you approach Simone Boccanegra and how you connect to that really special role.
Well, it is the first of all, I went to, it was a debut in Berlin with Daniel Barenboim, and it was in 2009. And he asked me, to do it. And I mean, I said, oh, well, I will read. I will learn this opera, I didn't know that it was going to be one of my really, really, really favorite, Yeah. And so, and after having this extraordinary production in Berlin, then I had a performance in La Scala, at the Met, in Vienna, and, it is really, really one of the greatest operas in the history.
I agree. You've also had a major career as a conductor. And I'm wondering, as a singer, which conductors did you work with who made you understand more about conducting?
Well, I mean, I was very lucky, to work with Karajan, with Giulini and Bernstein, I mean, and also Levine, Abbado, and Sinopoli. So I think we have a good amount of great conductors, I mean, I learned so much,
If I'm correct, you did a recording of Lohengrin with Abbado, who was my favorite conductor. I studied with him and a little, and when I worked at La Scala, and he taught me also about how to move singers on the stage, because he would explain to me, for example, it was Morella Freni. that if Morello was upstage, the sound arrived differently to the auditorium and to the pit than when she was downstage. And during a rehearsal, he would have her sing both ways so that I and other students could learn how to make that difference. And I think the best opera conductors also understand the drama of opera, and they want to communicate that in the music. So I'm wondering if you, as a conductor, do you listen for different things than you do as a singer when you listen to the music?
You know, it is. You really don't follow the music. You have, of course, to know deeply the drama, you know, because I mean, these composers, they really make the story fantastic, and you have to do it. You're going to spoil it also, you know. So it's a global way, you know. This is the most beautiful thing. I mean, you are created, and I try to respect also the needs of the singers. It's very important, because I have had, you know, I won't mention anybody, some conductors that they were just thinking about themselves, and they don't help the singer. So that was not good, you know. And I think it's so important. I think maybe because I am a singer, you know, I really try to do all the best I can to do when I'm conducting any singer, you know. I am doing now a lot, you know. I'm doing also singing also, but most of the time I enjoyed conducting. I was now in about 3 weeks in singing, conducting Turandot in Seoul, you know, and enjoy it. It was an extraordinary production for 4,000 people in the. It was the scenery was fantastic. It was a stage of 80 meters, you know.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. I mean, I will send you the production.
Thank you.
You will see, because it was filmed, you know, phenomenal. But I enjoy it as much singing as conducting, you know.
I've always noticed when you conduct that you're aware of how singers are breathing. And I've noticed how you carefully allow the breath to be just right for every singer. And not every conductor does that. James Levine did that. Claudio Botto did that. But not every conductor allows the singer to breathe. And that's a very special thing. They sound better when they're breathing properly. Now, speaking of South Korea, speaking of the whole world, you were talking about Seoul. In 1993, you created Operalia, which is an opera competition that has discovered and encouraged generations of outstanding young singers from all over the world, really all over the world. And each year, 40 singers compete. 20 of them are eliminated in the first round, 10 more in the second round, and 10 singers go to the finals. And the last time I checked, it's been held in India, South Africa, Kazakhstan, Canada, Spain, Austria. I have a list here: Russia, France, Great Britain, Portugal, Puerto Rico, Germany, and Spain. The list of prize winners includes many of the singers who are now in front of audiences all around the world. One time, you and I were together with James Conlon, and you were hearing auditions for young artists. And you were talking to me about what you look for in the young artists. And you used a word that stayed in my head all these years. You called it elements. In other words, what a young singer may have in terms of their potential, in terms of their artistry. So when you listen to a young singer, what do you look for? What do you listen for?
Well, what I have to say, that early in my life, after we Mary, Martha, and myself, we have a contract to go to Tel Aviv in Israel. And we stayed there 2 years there. And I sang, more, almost 200 performances. And this was the way of learn everything. All the repertoire. I think something that it is amazing in 3 days that you won't believe, but I was on Pearl Fishes one day, the next day, Carmen, and the following day, Pearl Fishes. 3 days, Bizet, in the opera. And, we learned so much being young that it was being in Israel, Martha and me, we thought that we need to do something for the younger singers because there was like a school, and I said, we have to do something. And then we start, it is now 40 years ago that we have, if you see the amount of winners of Operalia than they are around the world, it is amazing. And so I'm really very, very, very satisfied that and seeing it that today, as we were talking before at the beginning, is growing the world, the musical world, and there are unbelievable voices in any place that you will never believe that will be. But it's phenomenal. And in all around the world, I see singers that they have been winners of Operalia, wherever. There is no place. And it continues happening. So that started 40 years ago, and I hope that this will go forever, after us.
In fact, in the first year, one of the winners was a young soprano from Sweden named Nina Stemma. And you then later on made with her really one of the most famous opera recordings, who was Tristan und Isolde. And it was considered one of the last opera recordings done in a studio in the traditional way that people used to make recordings. And it was conducted by Antonio Pappano, and it is part of the catalog at Adagio. People who listen to us, many of them subscribe to Adagio, and I checked, there is a whole Plácido Domingo world on Adagio, and that the Tristan and Isolde is part of it. And it's a way for people to discover your artistry, because we have young people listening to this program, and they may not have heard you in 1968 in Lohengrin or 1973 in Otello and so forth, or Queen of Spades and all the roles that you did. And I'm very grateful that you worked in a time when people made recordings.
Well, it's Martha and me, we went to hear Nina Stemme singing Isolde with Pappano. And I never thought that I was going to sing Tristan. But, they called me and I recorded the Tristan with her, Amazing. This is how lucky I am that I was able to sing the opera of operas,
We only have a few more minutes because unfortunately you have time, but I have to go, unfortunately. But how can we spread opera even more in the world? Where can we take it? I know that we have great singers from Africa, from South Africa, from Nigeria, from North Africa. Korea has produced extraordinary singers. China, Japan, Mongolia is producing singers. But in some of the traditional places like the United States, Canada to some degree. There are challenges. The audience is getting older. They're not necessarily going the way they used to, in part because they watch on screens and they experience it indirectly. So tell me what you see as the future of developing audiences for opera.
Well, I think that is developing extraordinary. I mean, the different nations, they have opera company, and they are not able to bring always the big names, I mean, but this is happening, and they are born new artists. There are voices, and yes, it's amazing. We go to one city, to another, and many of these singers, they have been already won Operalia, and every day is growing and growing the love for opera, the love for music in all these countries. So it's fantastic, and we are very, very proud, that we can do to all those different places, and that they are born so many artists, and every day more and more.
So I never told you this, but I know a woman who had two sons. She had twins, and two boys were born at the same time. And she named them Plácido and Luciano because she wanted to honor you and Luciano Pavarotti. So that she named these two boys Plácido and Luciano, and they grew up loving opera. They're not singers, they don't work in opera, but their parents taught them opera. And I think a very important thing is for parents to teach their children opera. And it's something that you take a child to an opera, you talk about the story, you talk about the music, and that's the way that we continue to build the art form.
Well, what can I tell you? I mean, I think that was something that we were very proud, the three tenors. Really, it was amazing what we were doing now, in Rome, was extraordinary. And I mean, so we don't have him anymore. But, Jose and myself, we are still singing. I mean, in few days, will be singing together,
That's wonderful. Please give him my regards. He was actually, of the three of you, he was the one I met first. Because when I was a very young student at La Scala, and we were doing the Simone Boccanegra, he was the tenor.
Mm-hmm.
It was Freni, it was Raimondi, and then Giaudov, and it was Piero Cappuccilli with Abbado conducting and Strehler directing. Mm-hmm. And Jose was the very young tenor at that time, who was the first one. And then I met Luciano, and then I met you at the Met. And the three of you, but not only the three of you, all your colleagues and all of your artists have brought opera along. As I began this conversation, I said, and I meant this, I think of you as the North Star. You're the one that we all see as a model, who we've learned from. Every singer I know who's worked with you has found you a caring colleague. And I know that the rehearsal situation is often challenging for people. I know this, I've seen it many times, have been very supportive of artists who have needs. And your generosity as an artist is something that everyone I know has spoken of and are grateful to you for. So in conclusion, Plácido Domingo, thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience today with me and for my audience. And thank you for everything that you've given to opera. I really appreciate you.
Well, I really, my compliments also for 250th
Thank
uh,
you.
program. My God, I have beautiful, beautiful time, and well, let's start um, very much more at home because you need also. But I still traveling and I still singing and conducting, and the most important thing is Operalia. And as I said, now this future very soon, the school for the zarzuela.
I look forward when you open the school, you tell me about it, and I will tell everybody about the school for zarzuela. Plácido, thank you so much.
Thank you very
I'm
much, friend.
very grateful to you. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.